Hey everyone, welcome to our second episode of Bring On the Bad Guys. Today, as you can probably see by the display behind me and next to me, we're going to be looking at Fantastic Four villains from the 1960s. So to qualify to make our top 10 bad guys list, they had to have first appeared as a Fantastic Four antagonist slash villain in the 1960s. So there's a lot of great characters this time around, some of my favorites. Great rogues gallery that unfortunately is a little underutilized in mainstream audiences because of the lack of quality Fantastic Four films. But this is going to be your time to be educated by some of these great villains. So we are going to go right into number one. And number one is a very quirky villain, and some people may disagree with him being number 10 on the list. I do have some honorable mentions to go along with this list, but we're going to finish the main characters first. A quick review about our power scale. It's a 5-category scale that grades the people on the lists: personality, powers, mythology, design, cultural impact. Just the two that need the most clarification. The mythology is their story, everything that happens inside the pages of the comic book. Cultural impact is everything that happens outside the pages, so movies, TV shows, video games, etc. Number 10 on our top 10 list this week is the Molecule Man. First name of Owen Reese, his first appearance, Fantastic Four, number 20, way back in November of 1963. He definitely has the coolest place of origin on this list. He comes from a very small town called Dinosaur, Colorado. And created by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby. You'll see his power scale: personality 2, powers 4, mythology 3, design 2, cultural impact 3. So you may be wondering, what's this little known villain doing with a power ranking of 4? And that comes about because the Molecule Man is incredibly, immensely powerful due to the fact that he can control things on a molecular level. He ran into an accident, as is often the case with Marvel superheroes and villains from the early days, where he was bombarded by radiation. In this case, it was from a particle accelerator in the lab where he worked, and he was given the power to control things at the molecular level. And Uatu the Watcher was watching, as he is wont to do, and noticed and recognized the threat, and notified the Fantastic Four, thus breaking his vow of non-interference, one of the actually many times that Uatu the Watcher has done so. The Molecule Man is most famous probably for what he's had to do with the Secret Wars. Actually, his initial accident that gained him his powers also ripped a hole in our dimension and allowed the Beyonder to first gander at our universe. So the Beyonder is the one that set up the Secret Wars, where he pitted the good guys against the bad guys, and the Molecule Man was one of the bad guys and actually convinced by Dr. Doom to take a hand in fighting the heroes. And there's a lot of very interesting to do with the Molecule Man and how his brain worked and how he could store his consciousness in his wand, which he didn't actually need. More recently, it's been revealed that the race that the Beyonder comes from has shattered Owen Reese's identity and spread him across each individual multiverse so that they can effectively activate him into a multiverse bomb that if he were to die in one universe, the entire multiverse would follow along. So a lot of very interesting, very weird stuff going on with Owen Reese. Very fun character, even though he got some really bad costumes early on. Number 9 is the Puppet Master. Philip Masters from Fantastic Four, number 8. Created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, it came from the European country of Transia, which is a fictional country. Personality 3, powers 2, mythology, design, and cultural impact 3. And of course, Philip Masters is most known for his supply of radioactive clay. He makes puppets out of the likenesses of individuals, and then he can control them mentally through the radioactive clay. And he is also known for his relationship with his stepdaughter, Alicia Masters, and Alicia is, of course, the longtime love interest for Ben Grimm, the Thing. Puppet Master has appeared in 3 different animated series, the early 80s Incredible Hulk, and both of the more recent Fantastic Four animated shows. He also showed up in the video game tie-in to the 2005 Fantastic Four film. Yeah, look at that grin. That's someone I don't want to meet in a dark alley, even though he's kind of impish looking. Number 8 is one of the few times you're going to see a team on this list. I prefer to handle things on a more individual basis. And this team is the Frightful Four. The original roster, as you can see on the page there, is the Wizard, Sandman, Trapster, and Medusa. Their first appearance was Fantastic Four 36, and they got straight 3s all across the board in all their power scales, as is probably going to be the case going forward for a lot of teams because they have different members that you have to account for. My favorite is Sandman, who is usually just thought of as a Spider-Man villain, of course, but he and Paste Pot Pete, who changed his name to the Trapster, were broken out of prison. They saw the Wizard floating through the upper atmosphere as they were flying away from prison and decided we should catch up with that guy because he also has a beef with the Fantastic Four. Caught up with the Wizard, and the Wizard said, let's make a team, and we need to find a woman powerful enough to be able to counteract Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman, and the Wizard traveled around the world, found Medusa, who was an amnesiac at the time. Of course, she has since left the Frightful Four and become a superhero because she's a member of the Royal Inhuman family. So she is the only one to have appeared in the MCU to this point, although that's probably being retconned since the Inhumans show was so awful, and most of the TV shows are being kind of pruned away by the powers that be so that there's more of a conducive feeling between the shows and the movies. Going to number 7, the Mole Man, who has the distinction of being the first Marvel superhero, first Marvel supervillain ever. Harvey Elder appeared in Fantastic Four, number 1. Also, the very first Marvel superhero comic. Of course, Captain America and Namor and others appeared earlier, but that was before Marvel went by the name Marvel. And he was created, of course, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And while his personality and powers and design all sit down at 2, as they're not the best, you'll see his mythology and cultural impact all the way up at 5, which gets his total point scoring to 16. And that's purely because of his status as the first supervillain ever. And he has a very tragic backstory where he was a very ugly but very intelligent scientist, tried to convince some of his coworkers about the existence of at least a version of a hollow Earth, and they didn't believe him, ran him off, and he went exploring and discovered this undersea, I suppose some of it is undersea, underground kingdom of moloids and monsters that he proceeded to make his own. And he has gone up against almost every Marvel superhero you can imagine by virtue of him being the oldest Marvel supervillain. That is Harvey Elder, the Mole Man. He can't see very well, as you can see by his glasses, but he has attuned himself almost Daredevil-like to the underground caverns, practices sort of a jiu-jitsu form of hand-to-hand combat, and We have yet to see him on the big screen. There was a version of the last Fantastic Four script that did call for the Mole Man to be in the movie. At least Harvey Elder, if not his actual villainous counterpart. But when the screenplay leaked and no one liked it, then they made some changes, and the movie was still a dumpster fire. But at least they didn't waste Mr. Mole Man. Number 6 is the Super Skrull, and we're going to kind of dump in the rest of the Skrulls here since they were such a big influence on the Marvel Universe to this point, and they're also getting more famous because of the presence of them in Captain Marvel and going forward in the MCU. The Super Skrull was genetically engineered to be able to match all 4 of the powers of the Fantastic Four. So he can stretch like Mr. Fantastic, which was already somewhat possible because he is a Skrull and they are shapeshifters, just not to the extent that Mr. Fantastic could stretch. He can turn invisible like the Invisible Woman, set himself on fire like the Human Torch, and of course the Thing, he can morph into the rock-like appearance of the Thing, but the real engineering had to do with increasing his strength. So he is one of the foremost weapons that belongs to the Skrull Empire and hails from the planet Tarnax in the Andromeda Galaxy. His first appearance was in Fantastic Four 18 in September 1963. And power scale, his personality has never really quite matched up with more of the clever Skrulls. He is more of a punches problems type of individual and has never been that great with strategy. In fact, usually if he's working for someone, they'll have him alongside someone that actually is intelligent. Powers way up at 4 because he has all the powers of the Fantastic Four combined. Mythology 3, he's had a few really solid stories, especially as part of the Annihilation crossover event more recently. Design 4, he just looks cool. I think the Skrulls look ugly but cool at the same time, and just add the different fire and rocky thing skin as well, and you get a pretty cool design. Cultural Impact 3, we've seen the Skrulls, we have not yet seen Super Skrull, so we'll see if he comes down the pipe in the MCU. We're going to next go to the main rival of the Skrulls, and that is the Kree, and that is Ronan the Accuser. And he has the distinction of being the only person on this list that we've actually seen appear in the MCU. So he first appeared in Fantastic Four 65 in August 1967, and created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, of course. Personality 4, Powers 3, Mythology 3, Design 3, and Cultural Impact 4. And Ronan is a character that has evolved a lot through the comics. He started out as basically muscle that was sent to Earth by the Kree to punish the Fantastic Four for wrecking one of their Sentry robots. And then, since the Fantastic Four defeated him, he has really not liked them. But he's also, of course, been a villain to basically all of the major Captain Marvels. The Skrulls don't like him either. And the Guardians of the Galaxy and Inhumans have also had their issues with him. And of course, we've seen that play out in the Guardians of the Galaxy film, the first one, as well as the Captain Marvel film. And there is strong talk that they do want to bring his character back for a potential Captain Marvel sequel. That's Ronan the Accuser. He's actually more recently, I should say, was married to Crystal, who is the sister of Medusa, who we mentioned earlier in the segment about the Frightful Four. Next, we move to another really cool villain, Annihilus, who comes from the Negative Zone, of course. For his first appearance was in the Fantastic Four Annual of November 1968, the 6th annual magazine for the Fantastic Four. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the concept of annuals, is they were generally separate from the main series, and they were bigger, so they had more pages, and they featured sometimes a lot of reprints, sometimes fun, informative, like diagrams or informational pages about characters. Fantastic Four, actually, their first handful of annuals did continue the story that was being told through the series. So Annihilus has something called the Cosmic Control Rod, and that's what gives him all of his powers, which we rank at 4. His personality is a 3, mythology 4, design 4, and cultural impact 3. And the crazy thing about Annihilus is he is consumed with proving that he deserves to live, and that he deserves to be more powerful than everybody else. And the way he wants to do that is he wants to kill everybody else, because that is his twisted way of dealing with his apparently inferiority complex, where he needs to prove that he has power constantly. And the major story of Annihilus was the Annihilation Wave. And actually, in some talks with Andy Schmidt, who was an editor at Marvel at the time, he mentioned that the reason he chose Annihilus was that he felt no one had ever really used him to his fullest extent. And in Annihilation, the story, Annihilus is the main villain, and he leads a wave of bug creatures across the universe, just destroying and killing everything. And there was even a little while where it was rumored that Annihilus would show up in Avengers Endgame, which was a ridiculous rumor. But if you've heard his name, this is where that may have come from. Annihilus is really fun. He appears in the Fantastic Four, more manga-esque cartoon. That was the most recent Fantastic Four cartoon, and he's got a couple really great episodes, including one where he is picked to compete against the Fantastic Four in the Contest of Champions, and that is probably one of my favorite Fantastic Four episodes. So hopefully Annihilus shows up in the MCU someday. Number 3 is an interesting selection for us because he actually is known more as a hero, and that is Namor Mackenzie, Prince Namor as most know him, Namor the Submariner as many others know him. And just to go over his history to kind of set this up, his first technical appearance was way back in 1939 in a little comic called Motion Picture Funnies Weekly. And this was a comic that was going to be given away at certain movie theaters, and Bill Everett, the creator of Namor, worked with a few other people to try to get this program off the ground where they would hand these comics out. And long story short, the program never really took off. There's only maybe a half a dozen copies of the first issue in existence anywhere in the world. It was the only issue made of that series. The second issue never went forward because it wasn't deemed successful. Bill Everett then brought out Namor for Marvel Comics #1, where he had his first real quote-unquote appearance. And of course, the original Human Torch was from that comic as well. Fast forward all the way to Fantastic Four issue #4, and Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, has stormed out of the Baxter Building because he's complaining about not being treated seriously by the rest of the team. Goes off to a slum to kind of be on his own and runs across this amnesiac homeless guy hanging out in one of the shelters. Turns out to be Namor. The Human Torch recognizes him, picks him up, carries him to the ocean, dumps him in. The ocean jogs his memory, and he comes out. And he definitely comes out more as a villain in the early 60s because he leads several invasion attempts against the surface world, against New York, that are turned away by the Fantastic Four. He also has a big crush on Sue Storm, and that creates a romantic rivalry between he and Reed Richards. Slowly, Namor turned more into a anti-hero, the kind of hero he was in the comics where he appeared fighting alongside Captain America and the original Human Torch. And he has fought alongside the X-Men, alongside the Avengers. Very, very few people in the Marvel Universe have not had an interaction with Prince Namor. And, of course, he does predate Aquaman, but if you know the Aquaman story, it's very similar to Prince Namor, because Namor was the son of a human man and an Atlantean woman, so he can breathe both in and out of water, has super strength, can fly. They may have retconned the wings that are kind of infamous for being on his ankles, that originally gave him the power of flight, but really didn't quite make a whole lot of sense. Of course, he can command sea life as well, not quite like Aquaman, in that he doesn't have the telepathic connection, but still a master of undersea monsters. And his film rights have been sort of tied up with a lot of different things. Technically, they were with Universal. They had the right of first refusal, which means if Marvel wanted to make a movie, they had to give Universal Studios the first chance at producing that film. Much like was set up with the Hulk, but they were able to use Hulk in team movies after the first Hulk movie. So there are some rumblings that Marvel has gotten the rights back, and of course there was that very cryptic statement about the Wakandans not going anywhere near the ocean when there were random earthquakes. And a lot of people took that to be a reference to Namor, who has had some run-ins with the Black Panther in the past. Personality 4, powers 3, mythology 4, design 3, cultural impact 5, for a total of 19. Now we go to number 2. Definitely the most powerful villain on this list, and it's so hard to pick a favorite, but definitely a favorite of mine, Galactus. And Galactus's name was originally Gallon, and that's because he comes from the planet Ta in the universe that existed before this one. More on that in a second. His first appearance was in Fantastic Four number 48 from March 1966, and Galactus' story is very groundbreaking in that he was one of the first villains in these mainstream superhero comics that was almost beyond good and evil. He was a cosmic entity. He's almost the personification of entropy, where he needs to drain entire planets full of life in order to survive. So the guy eats planets, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. And his first appearance, he was heralded by the Silver Surfer, and we don't have to get into his story now, but he also has a great story in the pages of Silver Surfer comics. And the Silver Surfer's job was to go out and find planets for Galactus to eat. And the Silver Surfer arrives on the planet Earth. The Watcher, once again, breaks his vow of non-interference and alerts Fantastic Four, tries to hide the planet from Galactus and the Silver Surfer because Uatu really enjoys watching the planet Earth. And doesn't work. Galactus shows up, starts preparing to eat everything, and the Fantastic Four do eventually drive him off, primarily because the Watcher sends the Human Torch off to get the coolest named weapon in the Marvel Universe, the Ultimate Nullifier. And the Human Torch shows up with that weapon, threatens Galactus with it, and Galactus is very rarely beaten. He's almost always negotiated with or tricked into leaving the planet Earth alone. And that's what the agreement was in this case, was that they being the Fantastic Four, would not shoot Galactus with the Ultimate Nullifier, which did have the power to destroy Galactus, and Galactus would go find a different planet. So, personality for a huge cosmic being. He's not always the most charismatic, but he is able to hold a conversation with Reed Richards, which usually takes some doing and intelligence. Powers off the charts. 5 is obviously the highest we go, so he gets a 5. Mythology from the previous universe. Scientists, it was almost like Krypton, where scientists on his world figured out that the universe was coming to an end. They needed to see if there was any place they could get their people on the planet off so they could survive. They sent Galen, who was one of the top scientists, out in a spaceship to research, try to figure out what was happening. And he ends up getting, crunched in this big crunch in the universe before ours and reborn into this cosmic being. And basically, again, embodying the concept of entropy in our universe, where things eventually do have to end. And he slowly morphed from eating uninhabited planets to his hunger being so insatiable that he just didn't care anymore if it was inhabited or not. And that's one of the most interesting things about Galactus, is he is acting to survive. He very rarely, if ever, acts out of a desire to be evil. He is in need of sustenance, and that's what he's going for. And he has, I don't want to say famous, but a very interesting proposition or way of looking at things that he gives to the Fantastic Four. He says, do any of you care about ants that you're stomping beneath your feet that you don't notice? And that's always been such a intriguing premise to me, where you have this character that's so far above a human being that you can't convince him that it's worth it for him to not end the lives of everyone on the planet. Of course, he's appeared in every Fantastic Four animated series. He was in, technically, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. He appeared in a cloud, hidden by a cloud, and the directors and producers of the movie felt that there was going to be a third film, so they wanted to save the actual big reveal of Galactus for later and not just a couple minutes at the end of the second film. Of course, that never happened, so we were left with just big cloud Galactus. But again, hopefully he is on the table for an upcoming phase of the MCU. That brings us to number 1, probably in a fight with Magneto for the top villain in the Marvel Universe. As you can see, his power scale, we ranked him 5s for absolutely everything. His real name is Victor Von Doom. His first appearance was Fantastic Four number 5, way back in July 1962. Of course, he's famously from a small European country called Latveria, where he's the dictator. And he was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, of course. And you're not going to find too many people that are smarter than Dr. Doom on the planet, that are more charismatic, and that have a better story, at least as far as villains go. Dr. Doom grew up son of, gypsies in Latveria. His mother was a witch, and he didn't know that. His mother also died when he was very young, and he grew up with these gypsies, eventually was sent to the United States to get an education, where he met Reed Richards and hated Reed Richards from the very beginning. An accident in Victor's lab area ended up disfiguring his face. It was actually an accident that could have been prevented if Victor had listened to Reed, who warned him about some miscalculations he had made. But Victor had been convinced ever since that Reed had sabotaged his experiment. So Victor is kicked out of the university because of his crazy experiments, goes on a pilgrimage-type journey around the world studying mysticism, learning robotics as much as he can, joins up with some monks in Asia where he gets his mask, and returns home runs the old dictatorship out of Latveria, takes over himself, and again, we are led to some very interesting stories in the times where the Fantastic Four go to Latveria and they depose Doom from the throne, and the country falls into chaos. Because while you might disappear if you disagree with Dr. Doom, the country's peaceful, everybody's at work, and it's just very much a catch-22 situation that the Fantastic Four find them in, with Victor Von Doom and ruling his country. Of course, there's the famous diplomatic immunity challenge when he shows up in the United States, in that they are never able to actually arrest him because he is the ruler of a sovereign foreign nation. And he's also spent time as the Sorcerer Supreme. So he's one of the best robotics geniuses on the planet. He's one of the foremost magicians on the planet. He's one of the most strategic minds in the planet. He is personally my favorite Marvel villain, with Magneto very close. But Dr. Doom is someone that I cannot wait to see done properly on the big screen, and a lot of people are of the same opinion. He has, of course, been involved in almost every Fantastic Four mythology on the screen or on the page. Video games, he is a regular video game boss. He's the primary antagonist in Marvel Ultimate Alliance and Lego Marvel Superheroes, the now defunct Marvel Heroes Online, which was a great game, and he was also a playable character in that game. Every Fantastic Four film that's ever been made has included him, although none of them have really done his character justice. Actually, the best version of Dr. Doom is probably the early 90s film that was intentionally made poorly so they would never have to release it. In the mid-2000s Fantastic Four franchise, he was a corrupt businessman, and in the most recent Fantastic Four film, he was a scientist that worked with the Fantastic Four and was left behind in essentially the negative zone, and came back with no villainous motivation, but in order to create an ending for a film that was a dumpster fire, they did some edits, tried to make things look cool, and fortunately that is now forgotten. Another fun Victor Von Doom story is the Fantastic Four get to Latveria. They're in Doom's palace. There's battles going on with Doom and the Fantastic Four and his men and his robots, and the Doombots are just crazy. The Doombots are on par with Tony Stark's tech, if not higher, depending on the story that you read. And one of Doom's henchmen is fighting with one of the Fantastic Four in a room that houses a lot of Doom's artwork. And Doom's henchman knocks over the artwork, breaks it. And Doom comes in, doesn't continue the fight, stops the fight, tells the Fantastic Four to get lost because they're trespassing on foreign soil. And then once they leave, he has the person who wrecked his art dealt with, we'll say. And that's just the kind of character Doom is. He is standard only in the fact that he wants to take over the world on occasion. Other than that, he is an enigma and just a treat to read on the comic book pages. And even the times when he switches sides and helps the Fantastic Four are just wonderful to read, because you have Doom joining these heroes that he hates, but he's so smart, he's so intelligent that you have to listen to him because he knows what he's doing. There's even a point where he agreed to save the second child of Reed and Sue, but his condition was that they had to let him, Victor, name the child, and he named it Valeria. So another really cool aspect for Dr. Doom is that usually once a year he gets involved in a mystic routine that involves him attempting to win the soul of his mother back from Mephisto. And that is a story that's told pretty early on in his mythos, and it's one of the first stories in Marvel told from a villain's point of view, where he goes off and he has this noble quest that he is undertaking, and that you're kind of cheering for him at the time. So Doctor Doom, one of the best, and hugely influential in both the comics and off the comics. And yeah, I'm going to just keep saying and there's much more stories, but I'm not going to get into them because there's too many. And I could be here all night talking about Doctor Doom stories. I do have some quick honorable mentions. As you can see, we have some awesome Funko Pops here too. I'm pretty sure this is all the Fantastic Four ones that are applicable to our listing today. Super Skrull, Sandman, and Medusa from the Frightful Four, Doctor Doom, Ronan, Mole Man, Galactus, and Namor. And of course, I do want to go over my quick 4 honorable mentions. These comics here are from a really fun variant set that Marvel did a while back, where they put these pictures of Fantastic Four villains on the covers of all of them. So I will use them for illustrated purposes. We have the Mad Thinker, and he is one of the earlier Fantastic Four villains. Super smart, builds androids. He's one of those guys that thinks he has everything planned perfectly, and then it doesn't go well, and then he's like, how could I have possibly seen that wouldn't go wrong? And he probably should have been able to see it. Next we have Diablo, trying to get rid of the glare. He's an alchemist who has tried to convince the Thing to work with him in exchange for curing the Thing of his condition, and of course, being a villain, Diablo's motivations were not very pure. And then we have Ulysses Claw, and you probably know him from the Black Panther film and Age of Ultron. He also appears. And I didn't include him, even though he's probably more influential than some people on the list, because he is primarily a Black Panther villain now, even though he did start out as a Fantastic Four villain. So we will get to him when we do more of Black Panther stuff. And a personal favorite is the Red Ghost. And he is, that glare, I tell you, a communist scientist who was bombarded by the same rays that the Fantastic Four were, along with his 3 super apes who all have superpowers, and has, of course, duked it out with the Fantastic Four many times ever since. So that's all I have. Thank you for watching today. Next week we're going to actually kind of stay in the Fantastic Four family and do the villains of Prince Namor from the 60s, as well as his earlier appearances, although there's not as much continuity with those, so we're going to kind of just dabble into that a little bit. But Namor next week. Thank you for watching. This is Bring On the Bad Guys. I'm Jesse Meal, your host, and thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe to Daventry Studios, and have a great night.